Welcome to the Movement Upgraded podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jen Hostler, licensed physical therapist and certified strength and mobility coach. Here you can expect to hear about all things movement. The Movement Upgraded podcast is a blend of the science of strength training, rehab, and mobility, mixed with the personal and professional experience to provide you with the steps you need to keep your body pain-free and moving well, so you can do what you love forever. Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're going to talk about something that I talk about with probably every single person that I work with, and it's also a hot topic in my own home very often, and that is the seasons of training or the seasons of fitness. A lot of people, when you've been in the fitness world or you've been into fitness for some time, you will get results eventually, right? So at some point we get results, and then we start to kind of get married and really attached or identify with those results or the way that we got the results, right? So people who get really attached to like what their routine was to achieve those results, they really struggle to understand that we're not always going to need to or be able to sustain that level of pushing with fitness, right? So if we are working towards achieving results, whatever those look like, if you want to put on muscle mass, if you want to get stronger, if you want to build your fitness, get faster, if you want to build a bigger cardiorespiratory base, if you're like, whatever your goal, if you want to get splits, right? Whatever your goal is to get those results, you had to push. You had to be in a very big push phase. And sometimes we get stuck with that and we don't realize that push phases are not all the time. Even like the best athletes do this. They have their in-season and off-season training. They push for in-season and they really push their sports performance, and everything else is on hold. And then off-season, they pull back on their sports performance training and they build their strength and they work on their limitations and all of those things that they build better engines to work with when they're in season. And so it's important for us to realize that as we are on this long-term fitness journey, that there's going to be times where we're pushing and there's times where we're not. We all have limited resources. So whether that means time, whether that means like energy and mental capacity, or whether that means our body's ability to adapt. So we cannot adapt forever. When we are first in fitness, we will get a lot of results right away because we're new. We call them newbie gains. I love them. Strength comes fast. We're like, yes, this is great, right? We're always going to end up hitting a plateau because our bodies cannot just continually adapt. It's not going to work. Otherwise, we would have some insanely fit people. There is a point where we can no longer continue to adapt, whether that's because we have other life load filling up our cup, which decreases our ability to adapt to other stressors or what have you. It just means that we've done so much adapting, our body needs a period of like prolonged rest. It's really important to understand and accept that that is part of fitness. It is a part of a journey. And I know that social media kind of romanticizes this like constant pushing and PRing, and we love celebrating people's wins, but we forget that like PRing and like getting results and all of that really comes from a lot of maintenance phase work too. And so there are phases where we are just kind of maintaining. But back to what I said, when we start to get results and getting married to the way that we got the results, we get very attached to them and we think we need to continue doing things the way we got the results in the push phase. But reality is maintenance is far less work than we realize it is. But most people are so afraid to release control. They're like white knuckling their fitness. Like they're like, I'm not. I worked so hard to get this push up, or I worked so hard to get this like 6-minute mile pace. I'm not pulling back, like I don't want to lose it. And it's really important to take a step back if that's you and realize that like one, you're never going to be at your peak in every way, shape, or form of fitness in every part of your life. That doesn't exist. And the most important thing you can do is accept that like you can only push like one thing at a time, and accept there's going to be seasons of maintenance. And if it's hard for you to kind of do that, if you find yourself constantly in this trap, you may need to re-examine your relationship with fitness and what it's serving you as. I think that makes sense. But like if you are somebody who's like really attached and it's hard for you because you're like, okay, well, I've lifted and like done all of my routine 5 days a week, and I do this and I do that, and I did this way, and this is all the work I had to do to get here, right? I'm not losing it. What are you afraid of actually losing? What do those results mean to you? And what would losing those results mean to you? Because a lot of us who are recovering perfectionists, or maybe we have some self-worth tied into maybe some leftover diet culture stuff where our self-worth is tied to how our body looks. Maybe that has bled over into, okay, well, I've given up, like, my body changes and whatever, but like now instead of relying on how our body looks for our self-worth, we're now stuck in the trap of performance and how our body functions, which is also another not ideal way to hold your identity, right? Your self-worth is inherent regardless of how you look or how you function. And holding on to those things can actually impact your ability to meet your body where it is, and accept the phase that you're in life. And so that was like a really long intro into the seasons of training, but that's like why I wanted to bring it up, is because we are all going to have seasons of training. We have to accept it. And a lot of people come in my office and they don't want to accept that they are in a different season than what they actually are. And that word acceptance is something we work on a lot. And sometimes it takes us really re-examining our identities and realizing like we've kind of poured all our eggs into the fitness basket, and it's time to see who are we. We are multifaceted people. We have identities outside of fitness. Like, what other things are important to us? And it's just important to understand that. So there are no like, I don't know how to say this, like perfect categories of the seasons of training, right? Like, I'm not going to give you this list as like, this is the end all be all. This is just how I like to frame things when I talk to my clients. This is just my view and perspective on things. And so I usually like to tell people based off of where you are in your life. So like what your life load is, where your resources are as far as time or your body's ability to adapt, determines on like where and what season of fitness or training you're in. There are push seasons. And I already talked about this a little bit. Push season is when you're really progressing towards a goal. This is what we romanticize in the fitness industry, which is like, it's like exciting. It's new. I'm pushing, I'm PRing, or I get to like do, like I'm going for fitness. And like, I love when I get to do that. It's really fun. Training is fun for me then. But sometimes life loads are high. And when I say life load, I mean maybe you're dealing with caretaking of somebody, whether that is like several children, and they are requiring a lot of caretaking because there's different stages of being a parent. I'm not a parent, so I'm speaking as like an observer, but I nannied I nannied most of my life, and I have niece and nephew, and a lot of my close friends are parents. And so there's different stages where kids require more from the parents. In the earlier stages, they just require a lot more. And so you have less resources for yourself. You have less time. And so even if you're not caretaking for kids, maybe you're caretaking for a sibling or an older relative or a spouse, or maybe you just are busy because you're pushing in your business and you're really working on your career. Maybe you are, I don't know, there's a lot of different things that can be happening in your life. Maybe you're going through a big season of like working on some unresolved trauma or something along those lines where you're just like very high on the emotional like high emotions, like you're dealing with a lot of stuff, right? That's a high mental load. That's adding to your life load. And so that will take away your nervous system's ability to adapt. Does that mean you should stop training altogether? Most often, no. You need to move. Our bodies need to move, and we can always move in some way, shape, or form, or find something. And depending on where you are, that affects what your ideal like movement situation is going to look like, right? And so maybe you just have a lot of things you're trying to work on, right? Sometimes I work with a lot of like type A personality, like high achiever people, and they're like, I'm trying to be my best self. And I'm like, there is no such thing. Like there is no best self. Like you're not going to be your peak level of emotional intelligence and your peak level of career performance and your peak level of every aspect of fitness, because you can't even train every aspect of fitness together at the same time. Like if you're in a push phase, that even has layers of, okay, but what are you pushing in fitness? And a lot of people will work with me and they'll be like, I want this and this and this. And they're all over the place because we want everything and we want it all now. And I get it. But like my job as a coach, my job as a clinician is to really help people view what's realistic for them and understand, okay, one, like what phase are we in? What's realistic for you? And then two, we can only focus on like one or two things at a time. So if you're in a push phase in fitness, you're not going to be pushing in your strength and your cardio and your baseline foundation and building a bigger engine. And you can't be super fast and you can't be super athletic. You have to pick like one or two things at a time. Sometimes we don't get to pick, right? Sometimes life picks for us, but like that's a push phase. The maintenance phase is a different season. So if you're in like a maintenance season, that looks like life load is high. Either you don't have a lot of time resources or you don't have a lot of I would say like adaptability resources. Like you're just tapped on your energy levels. You're tapped on your body's ability to adapt. Maintenance phase is going to look like doing the bare minimum to just maintain where you're at, knowing that like you're not going to be able to maintain everything, but you can maintain the 1, 2, 3 things that are really important to you. My goal when I'm in a maintenance phase and what I tell most of my clients when they're in a maintenance phase is health first. So I want you to maintain some level of health beyond everything. And that means for general health, that means trying to check the boxes, right? And doing so, if time resource is limited for you, doing so in a way that is efficient. And so that's where we look at like combining things, and maybe it's not ideal for building strength, but it's ideal for getting a little bit of everything in. And so that's perfectly fine in a maintenance phase. And we earn those very often. And a lot of life is maintenance phases. And so even if you're in a maintenance phase for strength, it's very often significantly less to maintain something than it is to gain something. And I just like, I'm going to say that again, actually. It's significantly less effort and requires a lot less time and energy to maintain something than it does to gain something. Maintenance is way easier than we think. And the more I've been in fitness, the more I realize that. And by the way, I'm coming at you with a lot of this information from somebody who's gone through this myself. But if your goal is to maintain strength, you don't need to lift more than one time a week. You just need to make sure that your strength when you are lifting that one day a week is very intense. You're working at close to your max, right? Like 90%. And you're doing that. Like they're hard. And you don't even have to do a lot of sets of them. Just like a couple times, expose your body to it. Remind your body that this is the strength that you want to maintain, and like you can maintain it. Some things are not that way. Personally, I can't do that for like certain things, but for the majority, you can maintain most of your strength doing like a one lift per day, or I'm sorry, one lift per week. If your goal is muscle mass, you still only need to lift like once a week, but maybe now instead of just being at like a peak max, you need to lift towards failure. So like maybe if your goal is to maintain your strength and your muscle mass, you're looking at like one day a week of a really heavy set and then a couple back off sets where you're going to failure, and that's it. Like it's really very simple. And you could do it all in a full body day, or you could do one upper, one lower, and have 2 days, and that's it. I've built most of my fitness from 2 or 3 days a week of strength training. So you can make gains, and you can also maintain that way depending on who you are. And then for cardio, it's a little bit more difficult because we do lose cardio. I think we start to lose some of our cardio adaptations within 3 days of not doing it. that's more complicated, but like a general cardio base is not as hard also to maintain, like 1 to 2 times a week. Right. And it doesn't need to be super long. This is where things like higher intensity can be helpful. If you have the capacity and your body allows you to do higher intensity things. There are certain people that if they're super, super highly stressed and not recovering well, I kind of pull back on the higher intensity stuff depending on who they are until we get that regulated. But my main thought here that I want you to get out of this is that maintenance is just, it's not as hard. And I think what the hardest part of maintenance and being in a maintenance season is going to be accepting that you're doing less and really wrestling with the fact that it's significantly less than you needed to push, right? So that's maintenance season. Those are the 2 main seasons. The 3rd season is the one that I see people a lot for, which is going to be their limitations or maybe their weakness season. Most people come into me ready for rehab. And so we're not necessarily in a push season. We aren't, maybe we are, we're pushing our weaknesses, right? But we're not necessarily in a maintenance season. So usually when people come to see me, they've neglected their weaknesses or their limitations for so long and stopped and like avoided it, or they've stayed just in a push season for too long. They've never had any deloads, any maintenance seasons that their bodies are like, hey, I can't adapt anymore, right? We've ignored those cries for so long, or they didn't know. Like sometimes we ignore things because we just don't know what to do about it. Regardless, they come into me and they're like, okay, what do I do? And I'm like, look, everything else is going to go into a maintenance mode. There might be one thing you can push. Usually I try to find like one thing that they can like kind of do that is like helpful in maintaining like their, I don't know, motivation, so that they still are enjoying something in fitness. But I'm like, most of your energy is going to go to these limitations, and it's not fun. It's a new thing for most people. But after doing it, you start to learn there can be times where you do like deloads and then you're like, I'm going to work on my weaknesses. I currently, as I'm recording this, I think it's been over 2 weeks since I've done a lift. I got sick. I'm still recovering from my sickness. Like I can tell I'm very run down still. I'm just getting my steps back up. I am waking up and I'm like really tired in the morning, even though my Oura ring is telling me my readiness is coming up and my sleep is amazing. I can just tell because tracking devices are not everything, right? You can't let them do the work for you. They are only data and information, and they're only part of it. And so I'm still really tired. I think we did a kin stretch class and I was super, super sore from it. And that kin stretch class it was intense in its own way because it was more of a strength version. So it was like progressed, but my body was just like really exhausted after it. And so that tells me that I'm not fully recovered yet. And so I'm going to slowly get back into it. But in the past several months, I realized I'm coming off of a high. This year has been very stressful for me. I kind of went through a massive burnout without realizing it. And I realized that like it's not a great time to push for me. I also am looking into the future, right? So I got sick. I already had to take a break. It allowed me to reflect. I've realized like my body is not adapting as well as I would like it to, and some of my nagging things are popping up again. And they have more to do with stress than anything. But I also realize in the future, I have a lot of things going on. So we have Thanksgiving coming up and Christmas, and my sister's getting married and I'm the maid of honor, and a lot of people are coming down to visit in Florida. And so my schedule is kind of going to be chaotic, and I'm going to be busy, and I'm going to have a high life load, which means my body's not going to adapt as well. So it's not only just a maintenance season for me, but it's going to be a limitation season because, like I said, some of my nagging things are popping up. And I just realized there's been some things in fitness that I haven't really been working on because my motivation has been so low to even get to the gym that I neglected them. So I am like, this is a perfect time to do some of the stuff that I don't really like doing, and just kind of dedicate a whole season to it. And that's where we're at. So once you kind of have been in the fitness industry for some time, you can realize that you're going to be taking regular breaks where you work on your limitations. Now, can you work on your limitations and have like that programmed into your push seasons? Sure, like you could do that. But honestly, like I had said, it is really hard to work on a billion things at once. And I think a good part of my job is helping people zoom in and hone down, like funnel down what's really important, and then funnel down what actions they need to really focus on and what's really important, those big dial movers to achieve those results. And so sometimes I have to help people because they don't know, like they know what they want. So maybe they want to be able to go hiking and not have knee pain, or maybe they want to be able to like go to the groceries and pick up stuff off of shelves without back pain, right? There are certain things that they know they want, but like it takes some time for them to realize those are what's important, and that's what's driving them to come see me or driving them to work on mobility or whatnot. And so when they tell me those things, it's my job to translate that into, okay, what does that need to look like movement wise? And that's what I help them realize and help them create is a goal and things to focus on, and then a program with the things that we need to do to achieve it. And once you have kind of realized that you've been in the fitness industry for a while, you'll notice that you kind of fluctuate based off of your programming or your approaches. And I like to say life kind of naturally programs for you. So in strength and conditioning, we look very much at like macro cycles and mesocycles and microcycles, and we call that periodizing, which just is a fancy term of different seasons of training and picking what is important for each season and alternating that, and then having seasons where you're deloading and having more rest, allowing your body to rest, right? This is basically periodizing. That's what I'm talking about. And life has a way of doing that for you if you pay attention. Because I have noticed personally, as somebody who's very busy with the nervous system that tends to get overstressed easier, it's becoming less and less as I've worked on certain things, but things don't happen overnight. It's years of work. And so as somebody who is like that, I have noticed that sometimes I will try to have this idea, this map in my head of this periodized program that I'm going to follow. But in reality, my body is just, or life throws me all these things that I have to accept that like what I thought I would be doing and when my push seasons would be aren't always the way it is. And it's really important, again, kind of circling back to the very beginning of this podcast, to remember that we can't get attached to our goals. It's a two-way street. We've got to have goals and kind of a direction, but we've got to be communicating to our body and realizing like what our body is capable of based off of our life stressors, our life load, and our time and resources that are available to us at that time, and be realistic with what we can do. And also constantly be looking back and forth for, okay, if I'm in a push phase or a push season, like how am I responding, right? Am I pushing too hard? Is my body actually responding or not? And that's like why I wanted to make this podcast, so that you can understand that there's just are different seasons. You're not always going to be like pushing and gaining and whatever. It's easy to feel some major FOMO, by the way. Like that's normal. I'm going to normalize that. You'll get on the second, I swear, it's the way that our brains work, but maybe also the way the universe works. The second that you decide and you accept that you're not in this push phase, you're going to get on Instagram and it's going to look like everybody's doing everything, right? They're all doing it. Why can't I? But I promise you they're not. It's just your brain looking for why me? And it's just your brain. It's just how our brains work, right? But just know that like it's normal to have FOMO if you are not in a push phase, and we all love the push phases and they're great, but like we earn the right to push from our rest. So very often if we take some time to either have a maintenance season, or we call that like a deload period of time. Sometimes it's like a week, sometimes it's a month, sometimes it's a couple months, depending on where we're at and what we're doing. Or if we take some time to deload and work specifically on our limitations and allocate all of our time and energy in training towards that, and all of the rest is just maintaining, then when we go back to pushing again, yes, we'll have to build our strength back up or build our fitness level back up, but that is when we can push it even more maybe than last time. Sometimes not so much, but very often that's the way it is. And for a lot of people, we just spend so much time pushing that we don't spend enough time on our weaknesses or in maintenance mode. And that's where we really have to then be like, all right, fine, I'll take some time to work on my weaknesses. And it's been like, I don't know, 12 years sometimes for people, and they've been in the fitness industry. And then I'm first introducing some of this mobility stuff or tempo concepts or working on higher volume or adding in some of the stuff we hate, like carries or like breath work. Oh my gosh, everybody hates breath work, right? But once you haven't done that for so long, your period of like working on those things might be longer then. So now we're looking at 1, 2, 3 years of like less pushing, right? And more of that maintenance and limitation work. And so it's not a punishment. It's just sometimes then we have to work more on those things, and we all have limited time, so we can't do all of the things at once. So the gist of this podcast episode is to help you look at fitness from a little bit different lens. And maybe listening to some of this can help you come to terms with where you are in your current fitness journey, and maybe it can inspire you to spend a little bit of time working on your weaknesses or limitations. I will be doing that at the end, this last little bit of this year. I don't even know when this podcast episode is coming out, but I likely will be in the middle of working on my weaknesses. So if that's you, just know that you're not alone. I will be doing it too. And if you want some information on like, well, okay, but how do I know what my weaknesses or limitations are? This is where obviously the ideal is going to be working with somebody one-on-one who can give you an assessment and help you understand. One, they're going to talk to you. They're going to get an idea of what you want to do. And then two, they're going to look at, okay, what is your body capable of now and where are your limitations at? What's holding you back? And then they can help guide you, right? But if you can't work with somebody one-on-one, Kinstretch, like my Kinstretch class membership, every single one of those classes is a perfect opportunity to explore and learn about your body and find your weaknesses and then actually work on them. Like a lot of the exercises are also little mini self-assessments. So that is another perfect way to learn about where your weaknesses are. And then you can start to do them more consistently or address them more consistently. And you can check out the other podcast episodes on how to start to implement some of those things. So yeah. Hopefully this gives you a little bit of inspo to work on your weaknesses, and also gives you a little bit different lens to view things, or it helps you reframe how you think about things, because we get so attached to what it took us to get to a certain level, we don't realize how little it takes to maintain it. So those are the main things that I hope you got out of this podcast. If you found it helpful, let me know. If you know of somebody who would benefit from listening to this, please share away. I am always thankful when anybody recommends my work to anybody else. It is like the highest, utmost compliment you can give me. And if you haven't reviewed the podcast yet, please go hit that 5-star, leave a little review, let people know what they can expect from the podcast or how much you love it. That's the best way to support me. And if you have any questions, you know where to find me. So thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next. I always say I will see you. I will not see you, and you will not see me, but I will talk to you in the next podcast episode.